All right, it is officially 12. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar Series. My name is Elena Whitaker, and I'm the Water and Conservation Educator with ILF. And today we have Greg LaBarge talking about residual soil in. And so with that, or really quick, if you have any questions for Greg, go ahead and submit them in the chat, and we'll get them asked at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, the floor is yours. You are muted, Greg. Yep.
On mute and get everything working here. Should be good to go then.
Yep, everything looks great. You're good to go.
Perfect. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to talk all you folks in Iowa or other places that may be viewing the webinar here. I work as an agronomist in the state of Ohio, spend a lot of my time in nutrient management and water quality issues, particularly related to Lake Erie. So I'm often talking about issues related to phosphorus use and problems as that nutrient enters water bodies. But appreciate the opportunity today to talk about nitrogen and some of the work that I do there in that particular nutrient, and really focus in on corn. When we talk about the nitrogen cycle, or nitrogen management overall, it's a challenging nutrient. And optimization, we can talk about optimizing in a couple of different ways. We can talk about it from the standpoint of the economic cost of that nutrient and getting into the plant the amount of nutrient that we apply. Then we can also think about it from the environmental aspect, in that, leftover nitrogen at the end of the season is going to be problematic as far as downstream when we talk about losses, particularly here in Ohio. I'm going to say that between the ideal of leaching and moving out through tile line nitrates or through denitrification, that we really do drain our soil system of all the nitrogen that's available. Let's see here. And if I can mark it here. Yep. I mean, really what we're trying to do is get plant uptake of nitrogen is really our primary goal, but we have all these loss paths that are potential. First of all, when we think about application, we can talk about volatilization, particularly of the any urea or any ammonia that would be within a source that we apply. Surface application causes us problems as far as nitrogen loss. Certainly nitrate through leaching, and then denitrification. Really, all of those are very much a part of what we have to almost account for, and do account for somewhat, in our nitrogen recommendations. All right. Too many things on screens here popping up, but we'll get through it. When we talk about, just so you have a perspective on where we're at in Ohio from a nitrogen recommendation standpoint, it looks very similar to what you have in relationship to Iowa. We're part of the group that works with the MRTN. Our information for nitrogen recommendations is housed at the corn nitrogen rate calculator there at Iowa State. And from our view of the world, this would be our nitrogen recommendation going into the 2023 corn crop. So our price of nitrogen at 75 cents and our corn price at $6 would give us an MRTN rate of 170 pounds of nitrogen with that profitable range between 158 and 182. So, that is where we're coming from. I looked at the Iowa numbers here this morning, and I guess for the majority of the state, you would be at somewhere around 139 pounds with an MRTN rate. This may help you understand some of the numbers that we show here in just a few minutes. When we think about managing nitrogen on corn, we often do it from a very visual standpoint. We will go out in a field and we will, take a look at the canopy color and the lower leaves, how much firing we have. You see here a set of photos from our nitrogen rate trials at our Northwest Ag Station. You see 0 on the left-hand side, and you have a lot of firing of the lower leaves. You also have a canopy color that's not ideal, certainly yellow. We're working at the time of year with this photo in the R5 stage. So basically, we have taken up the nitrogen that the plant's going to utilize, and this is where we're at. I would say that actually here in 2018, the 0 plot looks pretty good compared to some other years. We would have a much shorter canopy height or plant height overall in a lot of years. So, it is a better year for us from a ideal of moisture. The 120 rate, we can see that, we've got some firing on the lower leaves. The canopy color overall is a little bit lighter than comparing it to the 240 pound rate. And that 240 pound rate has a very green from top to bottom plant color to it. Really, we know that nitrogen isn't deficient. The thing that we might ask ourselves, though, is how much over application of nitrogen might we have had? I mean, when we think about the corn plant, we think about nitrogen being mobilized for, particularly at this growth stage, having been mobilized from other parts of the plant and moved into that corn ear to help satisfy the nitrogen need for grain fill. And here we have a plant that's green from top to bottom and really not much mobilization of nitrogen in that plant. When we think about yield and laying that over the top of this, this is what the yield response would have been in that 2018 growing season. We can see that, we actually needed that 240 pound rate to maximize our yield, but we can also see that as we go back into that MRTN rate area of around 170 or so pounds, that we are actually just a couple pounds shy in relationship to that yield that we're getting at 240. But once again, we do need to ask that, what do we have left over at the end of the season? And that's where we've done a little bit of work here in Ohio to try and evaluate that. Unless you go out and do a soil test, really, I don't know how to judge a nitrogen program from residual nitrogen at the end of the season. Corn stalk nitrogen test is also another way to look at, did we have enough uptake of nitrogen in the corn plant? Basically, what you have here is we have 4 different growing seasons. This is in our corn soybean rotation. And you have different residual nitrogen at the end of the season. Here we have on the y-axis, we have pounds of nitrogen. And this would be from taking a soil sample and analyzing it for the ammonia and the nitrogen in that soil sample, and then calculating out what is the equivalent pounds of nitrogen in the soil. And then you have our different, on the x-axis, different nitrogen rates in our nitrogen rate trial study. And you can see 4 very distinct seasons. Actually, the 2018 season is here. And we had a, 235 was our agronomically optimal nitrogen rate that maximizes yield. And our yield at that particular nitrogen rate was 226. If we go back here and kind of look in this range as far as how much residual nitrogen we had, we're talking about the our 2018 season. We're working with this blue line here, and what we're seeing is residual nitrogen in the soil of about 50 pounds at that MRTN rate. If we look at another season, 2016 had our highest residual soil nitrogen, and we're at that rate somewhere around 140 pounds of nitrogen. And you can see that it was not a very responsive year. We were talking about 200 or 86 was our agronomically optimal nitrogen rate, and our yield was 157. 2020 was another year where we had a fair amount of nitrogen left over in the soil profile, somewhere around 80 or so pounds. And that was also a year where we had 158 yield at the agronomically optimal nitrogen rate. But it was, in that case, a responsive year, and we actually needed that 240 to maximize yield. So in the two seasons, 2018 and 2021, where we have our lowest residual soil nitrogen, that is where we also have our highest yields of somewhere around 230 bushel per acre. So, this, and you can see it's a linear response. Our lower rates have a lower amount of residual nitrogen, and even and you can kind of judge a background rate in every year is somewhere between 20 and 30 pounds of nitrogen that we have out there. So what happens to this nitrogen at the end of the year? And actually what we can do is look at well, back up for 1 second and just talk about manure, because we get a lot of concerns about manure in our region. And particularly when we think about Lake Erie, we have a lot of attention given to our livestock organizations and livestock commodities. And when we talk about, is manure worse from the standpoint of nitrogen residual at the end of the year, here's a study from our Northwest branch where, we use similar rates of manure and UAN for a target nitrogen rate of 200 pounds of nitrogen. And basically at the end of the season, we had a very similar amount of residual nitrogen in the soil. So manure doesn't necessarily mean a worse situation, but if we have similar yields under those types of conditions, we're going to see, whether it's a organic source or a fertilizer source, this type of residual nitrogen in the soil. And then when we think about measuring nitrogen in the soil over a growing season or growing season and after, we see these kind of numbers in June of 2020, and we're using manure in a side dress application, and then comparing that to 28%, and you can see the amount of nitrogen in the soil in June after application is very similar for those two crops, or those two nitrogen sources, I should say. And when we get into November, by that point in time, actually we have a lot less nitrogen in the soil profile with the UAN, but with both of them, we see a steady decline. And by the time we're back into May of 2021, year after application, basically we're back at that kind of 20 pounds of nitrogen in the soil. So both react similar. And when we think about where is that nitrogen going from any of those systems, what we're thinking about is, in my mind, money going down the drain and the tile drain in this case, and out through our stream systems where we need to be concerned. And we have some evidence of that through our edge of field studies here in the state of Ohio. We have a network of paired sites where we see those represented by the letters A through T. So there are 20 sites, and at each one of those sites, there are two fields, two watersheds within a field, or two fields separately that are being monitored. for, in this case, nitrogen loss. We'll put different practices on one field at site A, and then use the farmer practice on the other field and do a comparison. And you can see here the nitrogen loss numbers, and these are average annual losses from 2011 to 2020. And what you see is we have some sites that for every year in that time period, they're having about 80 to 90 pounds of nitrogen being lost to the tile system. The yellow and that red line is just marked there at 100 pounds, just to give a comparison. Under today's economic conditions, certainly thinking about 100 pounds of loss or 80 pounds of loss is, translates to me to $80 per acre that we're losing. The yellow line, our Ohio EPA has done some mass balance studies on the watershed up at going into Lake Erie from the Maumee River, and what they come up with is an average based off of the number of acres and the amount of nitrate going in, an average of about 20 pounds per acre that is being released. So you can see even a number of sites that are above that background level that we are describing in that mass balance study. Site C, site E, site J, what's going on there? And reality is in those situations, what we have is it's manure applied with commercial fertilizer, and we're not accounting for enough credit towards the manure nitrogen source. So some things there that we can think about: better management and better profitability. When we think about these losses, so what can we do about it? And the one and first place that I would go to, what should we do about it, is cover crops. We can think about cover crops to retain that nitrogen on the soil and in the field, not allowing it to go downstream. And basically what we have here is a study from our edge of field sites where we've had cover crops in place, comparing them to no cover crop in the comparison field. And what we've got is really from December through to June, that we have the ability in that time frame to reduce substantially the amount of nitrate loss by having cover crops in the field. And the gray circles are where we have cover crop present in the field. And then we're comparing that to the red triangles where we have no cover crop in the field, and you can see a couple pounds difference. And and particularly in April and May, we're seeing huge differences on a monthly basis in relationship to the amount of nitrate loss. Down here, kind of the summary number is 39 pounds on average. We're seeing reductions, and this is reducing by 84% the amount of nitrate loss going downstream. And cover crops, we've done some work to try and evaluate what that means from a soil health standpoint. This is a set of data that was, we went out to fields that had a history of cover crops versus those that did not have a history of cover crops, took soil samples. I think there was 120, 140 fields in this database. And what you see is with the blue chart representation, what we see with that color is the amount of distribution of organic matters and the percentage on the y-axis. And what you see is that we have compared to the red area that we don't have any cover crops in the field comparison, basically what we end up with is a shift to the right and a higher average organic matter, a higher distribution of organic matters within fields with cover crops. POX, the center chart is With POX, what we have is a representation of the mineralizable organic matter in the soil. So that's what's going to be turning over nutrients. And once again, a higher number is better, and we see a shift to the right with fields that have cover crops in it. Respiration would be that biological microbial activity in the soil. Not quite as strong a signature as what we see in the other two, but certainly we do see a shift in that parameter as well. So soil health builds us a better basis, and I don't think any of us will argue on having higher organic matter soils. We know all the benefits of that, and what we see here is an ability to recover nitrogen, build soil health with cover crops, and I think that's a good thing and good message for us to take into the future. PSNT test basically is a very good tool for us when we think about fall manure management, and we do work with that here in the state. We have these recommendations from when we go out and pull that PSNT test number and think about an adjustment to our MRTN rate. So if we have a 14 part per million soil test nitrate level, we would talk about taking that 170 MRTN rate and making it 140 at side dress. We have an opportunity to adjust and utilize the nitrogen within that manure application by going in and evaluating it right before side dress. Here is a number. We tried to put this to the test in a study at our Northwest station in 2020 and 2021. We applied 5,000 and 8,000 gallons of manure. Then we reduced the side dress nitrogen rate based off of the PSNT test. And actually, we pushed the numbers that you just saw on the chart, and show you that here in a minute. Our check is 185 pounds of nitrogen per acre as UAN. You see with the 5,000 gallon manure, depending on the year, we got anywhere from 10 to 14 part per million nitrate level. And then with 8,000 gallons of manure, we were between 14 and 18. Our check is back down around 5 part per million, kind of a background soil test level. And here's on the left-hand side that PSNT chart, just so you have it in mind. Then we also have the corn yield in figure 2. And you have within that box over top of the nitrogen rate and yield response, or excuse me, the fall manure application rate and the corn yield response, you have a box that has the actual amount of nitrogen that was applied. Our check, we applied 185 pounds of nitrogen. With our 8,000 gallons of manure, we reduced that by 90, and 95 pounds was applied. And finally, with our 5,000 gallons, we reduced that by 50 pounds, and we applied 135 pounds at side dress. And you can see very good yields, 230 or 240 to 250 bushel yields. And actually in the 2022 year, you could argue, and at 8,000 gallons at least, you can argue that we had higher amounts of yield based off of using those standard error bars. We're outside the check and saw an increase in yield. So just some things there in mind, and we can reduce that. And you can see here where we pushed the soil nitrate levels just a little bit, and then we also pushed the rate of reduction a bit. And so I guess I would encourage, and I hope that all of you are using it because of Black Mirror's development of that in Iowa, this PSNT test, and that you have a lot of good data to base your nitrogen recommendations on. I just we'll finish up here with this last slide, and what we're talking about here is a resource that all of you have available to you. And we can see how on the left-hand side that the nitrogen different conservation practices affect reaching that 40% reduction goal, and certainly cover crops are important in that. And I would encourage cover crops over some things like wetlands and saturated buffers and bioreactors, all good practices, but all capital cost practices that we can't recover anything off of. When we talk about cover crops, recognizing the challenges that go along with cover crop management, there's an opportunity there to, gain a soil health improvement and applying that practice. So that's why I hit upon that pretty strongly here today. I think just summary slide here, residual soil nitrogen. Probably the best way to measure that is going out and doing a soil test at the end of the season. Gives you an idea of what's left over. You can also do a corn stalk nitrogen test with that to measure the uptake in the plant, and that's a good 1-2 type of test that you can use in judging your nitrogen program. Nitrogen losses are measured at the edge of field, and they can be pretty significant, as we saw earlier. Mitigation of that residual nitrogen, once again, cover crops managing the rate of application, and then using with manure in particular pre-sidedress nitrogen tests to determine, and then certainly structural practices are another way to manage that. The cost of those can be substantial, and hopefully a cost share program in place to be able to put that practice out. And greatly appreciated the opportunity today. And Lena, we'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so if you watch today's webinar and you're hoping to get CCA CEU credits, go ahead and send me the following information: your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar if it was different, and then your CCA number by 5 p.m. today. Again, my email is alenaw@iastate.edu. And then also, if you could switch to the next slide, Greg. If you watch today's webinar or any of our previous webinars, we do have a voluntary demographic survey out right now. You only have to fill it out once per webinar. So if you filled it out previously this year, you are good to go. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat as well. Just 1 second. Okay. And then if you want to flip to the next one. Next week's webinar is with Dr. Justin Gleason. He is the state climatologist of Iowa, talking about the COCO-RAS network, which is citizen scientists and the community collaborative rain, hail, and snow network. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and switch to questions. So again, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and be putting them in the chat and we'll get them asked. A first question we already have, though, is someone is saying they did not see an N credit for corn after soybeans. Is that taken into account in the MRTN? And if so, what is the estimate of pounds of nitrogen per acre from a 50 to 60 bushel per acre soybean crop?
Yeah, in the MRTN, we do provide 2 rotations for the state of Ohio. One would be a soybean corn and one would be a corn back to corn rotation. So no, we don't provide a credit, but it's in essence baked into the recommendation because we have the yield curves developed off the soybean corn rotation and then the yield curves off of the corn back to corn rotation. Back in the old days when we were in a yield base, we would be around a 30 or 40 pound credit. But on the MRTN, because it's all baked into the tool, we don't talk about a separate end credit.
So this person says, when you say cover crops, are you using primarily cereal rye? And if yes, when do you typically seed and then terminate the cereal rye?
Yeah, as far as cover crops, the database that was used to generate those numbers actually included cereal rye. There may have been some wheat in there, also, so small grains in general. And then there would have been, some mustard being used. So some of the oilseed types of crops, mustard or in that category. So it was a variety of different covers. In Ohio, cereal rye would be the predominant one at this point in time. Typically, we're seeding that as soon as we can. Not a lot of interseeding, so a lot of it is being planted after harvest. Much of it goes on soybean acres due to that. And then termination really is kind of up to the individual's comfort. So we can be terminating it at 6 inches. In some cases, here in Ohio, planting green. For the majority of the trials that we're talking about that would be in the study that I was sharing the information on, most of those would have been more advanced stages, certainly wouldn't have been at that 6 or 8 inch stage. We would have had those going much closer to planting.
Perfect. All right. Another question is, what sizes are the fields monitored in the edge of field studies?
And the size range for those fields or really, watersheds potentially within a field range anywhere from about 3 to 4 acres up to 40 acres is our largest field that is monitored. And we're monitoring both the tile and the surface water leaving those sites.
And then we have a raised hand in the chat. Oh, nope, never mind. Matt doesn't have a question. So if there are any more questions, feel free to send them into the chat today. Otherwise, again, just a reminder, CCA credits, you can email me, Alena Whitaker, ALENAW @iastate.edu by 5 p.m. today, and join us next week for the CocoRez Network. Otherwise, those are all the questions that I have in the chat. Do you have anything, Greg?
No, I don't. Just appreciate the opportunity and have a safe winter season here and also a safe growing season, and best wishes for all of you for 2023.
Yep. And someone did just say in the chat that they have one last question. All right, just a second.
I raised my hand because you're going to cut this off before I could type in a question.
Yeah, go for it. Go ahead and ask.
Okay, so it takes us a while to get so the scale of the edge of field studies. Really enjoyed the presentation, Greg. And I'd like you. I'll see if I can. I'd like to hear a phosphorus one too. You probably got one recorded somewhere. So. But at the scale of these fields, especially the smaller ones, have you closed the water balance? Is there no water that leaves that system that you haven't monitored? I mean, have you really captured all of the export if you're monitoring at the edge of a 3-acre field?
As close as a system could be. I mean, we could still have some groundwater type of infiltration, through tile systems and so forth. But, reality, as much as we could possibly do, we are monitoring all the water leaving the site. And we do have, obviously water balances for the fields. And then each field is equipped with a weather station. So we know precipitation at that site. So yes, we can do pretty complete hydrology of the fields. And when I say the we, actually the we is our USDA ARS soil drainage unit, Kevin King working with that, leading that group. And they're the ones that have all the data and do a lot of the development of the materials, and particularly that slide on nitrate loss at edge of field, that would be coming from them.
Okay, so what I'd be interested in knowing is the water yield at 3 acres comparable to the water yield at a larger scale? That would be the way I would sort of judge.
Yeah.
Do you know that? Or?
Sure. And the thing to know is that all of those numbers were adjusted back to a per acre loss. So size shouldn't matter in that case because we put a 3-acre field and it's divided the total loss divided by 3. Our 40-acre field was the total loss divided by 40 to come up with the pounds per acre of nitrogen loss or phosphorus loss, whatever nutrient we're talking about.
Yeah, that's clear. But water yield is by definition already adjusted for area. So what I'm asking is centimeters per year of water yield. That would be on a already normalized for area. Do you happen to know what you had for those fields? I didn't see flow data.
Yeah, and I don't have flow data for particularly all those fields. That's something that we could follow up with Kevin on and would be happy to have a conversation with you later.
I'll probably send you an email or follow up through Matt. So thank you.
That would be perfect.
All right, well, that looks like all of the questions. So thank you again, everyone, for joining today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.